We know that the Vikings had contact with Christians. We know the
Mm,
Vikings had contact with Muslims. What do we know
yeah.
about Vikings coming into contact with Jews?
It's a very good question. So it is, there's a whole doctoral thesis that was written by a friend and colleague called Richard Cole, who wrote his thesis specifically about Jews in Old Norse literature,
Hmm.
right? And what is fascinating from one of the things that comes out from it is the distinct lack of Jews in Old Norse literature.
Hmm.
He actually makes this as a theme, really, in his thesis, that there is a distinct lack of Jews in Old Norse literature, compared to, for example, the amount of Muslims that are mentioned or the frequency of Muslims mentioned in Old Norse literature. But otherwise, the amount of Jews is very little. Um, there would have been certainly, I mean, if they would have come across Muslims, especially in Al-Andalus, so Spain, there is no reason to reject the idea that they would have also met Jews there, because especially Al-Andalus was very much a multicultural society. Well, most of the Islamic world definitely it was, especially Mediterranean, like Spain and Sicily as well, which was very multicultural. And at that point in time, 9th century, 10th century, there would have been not only a large community of Jews living in Sevilla, for example, or Cordoba, which were sort of the power centers of Al-Andalus, but they were part of the courts. They were part of the emirs group of people. They were known for being translators. For example, the Jews were known for being very good for translating because they would have known multiple languages. They would have known the local Spanish dialect, or what would have been Old Spanish, but also Arabic and Hebrew, of course, and so they were very well known for that. So they were very well integrated and very well integrated, part and parcel of the culture itself. So they would have certainly come across Jews through their travels, but we do have a distinct lack of mentions of Jews in the literature, which is fascinating. I have to say, the Richard Cole's thesis is a really fascinating look at this. Um, a lot of it tends to be through translation. So they would have translated literature from Latin. Of course, this is post-Christianity, post-Christianization, uh, that would have mentioned them there. But there was a distinct lack of knowledge of meeting, perhaps, or interacting compared to Muslims.
Yeah, that's something I've
Which, of course, you
wondered.
have to keep in mind. Of course, with Muslims, there would have been whole countries, whole well, not kingdoms, emirates and caliphates that would have been majority Muslim. So, they were interested in who's leading that place.
Hmm.
Whereas, of course, Jews would not have had their own sort of polity, their own country that they are running right at this time.
Hmm.
So it wouldn't have it would have been perhaps a footnote almost in their journey. Generally speaking, I have to keep in mind as well that people who are writing, or people who are writing themselves, usually are, higher society, but also they're writing about people in the higher society. They don't really care about the normal peasant, right? They don't really care about, just the normal person. They're writing about kings. They're writing about, noble people, about heroes, and so a lot of the interaction that you're getting in these texts is also between people of higher standing. So that would make sense that if they're traveling to other places, they're meeting the leaders of those places. They're meeting the noble people from those places. So yes, if they're going to an Islamic land, generally they're going to interact with, you know, the leaders of those countries, which would have been, of course, Muslim. So it's a very interesting. It's a very interesting uh, lack, perhaps, of Jews in the literature, which is yeah, fascinating.